The click of my stilettos against the imported Italian marble echoes through the cavernous foyer like gunshots in a cathedral. And I know before I even look up that he's there, waiting for me in the darkness like a beautiful predator who's finally cornered his prey after a long and patient hunt. The grandfather clock in the corridor chimes twice, its ancient gears grinding out the melody of my potential demise. And I freeze with one hand, still on the massive oak door behind me, my heart hammering so violently against my ribcage that I'm certain he can hear it from wherever he's watching me with those storm-gray eyes that have haunted my dreams and nightmares in equal measure since the day my father signed my life away to end a war that had already taken too much blood from both our families. I force myself to breathe, to remember the training Agent Morrison drilled into me over the past 3 months of clandestine meetings in parking garages and abandoned warehouses. The mantra of, stay calm, stick to your story, never let them see you sweat, playing on repeat in my mind like a broken record. But all of that careful preparation evaporates like morning mist when I finally lift my gaze and see Dante Vittorio standing at the top of the grand staircase, a vision of deadly masculine beauty that would make Lucifer himself weep with envy. He's wearing nothing but black silk pajama pants that hang low on his hips, revealing the intricate tattoos that crawl up his torso like ivy claiming ancient ruins, each one telling a story of violence and victory that I've never been brave enough to ask about in the 6 months since I became his wife in name, but never truly in spirit. His dark hair is disheveled, falling across his forehead in a way that would be boyish on anyone else, but only serves to make him look more dangerous, more untamed, like a wolf who's been disturbed from his den and is deciding whether to go back to sleep or tear apart whatever dared to wake him. The ambient lighting from the crystal chandelier above casts shadows across the sharp planes of his face, highlighting the strong jaw that's currently clenched tight enough to shatter diamonds. The high cheekbones that speak of old Roman aristocracy, mixed with something wilder and more primal, and those lips that I've felt against my skin during the perfunctory kisses he gives me when his associates are watching. Kisses that are somehow both burning hot and ice cold, filled with possession, but empty of affection. But it's the gun dangling from his right hand, casual and almost careless, like he's holding a glass of wine instead of a weapon that could end my life before I even had time to scream, that makes my blood turn to slush in my veins and my carefully constructed composure begin to crack like a porcelain mask under too much pressure. "Why are you so dressed up, Mowgli Mia?" His voice rolls through the space between us like distant thunder, promising a storm that will devastate everything in its path, and the Italian endearment that should sound sweet instead sounds like a threat wrapped in velvet and dipped in honey. Because we both know that I am his wife only in the legal sense, only in the sense that my signature appears next to his, on documents that might as well be my death warrant. And the fact that he's chosen this moment to use that particular term of possession makes my skin prickle with the kind of fear that's primal and instinctive, the kind that my ancestors felt when they heard predators moving through the darkness outside their caves. I taste copper in my mouth and realize I've bitten the inside of my cheek hard enough to draw blood, a nervous habit from childhood that resurfaces whenever I'm terrified beyond rational thought. And I force my lips into what I hope resembles a casual smile, even though my hands are trembling so badly that I have to clasp them together in front of me to hide the evidence of my terror. "There was a charity gala at the Belmont Hotel," I say, and I'm proud of how steady my voice sounds despite the fact that my heart is trying to claw its way out of my chest and run for the hills without me. "The orphanage foundation that your mother used to support before she passed, they were honoring her memory tonight, and I thought it would be good for the family's image if someone from the Vittorio household attended." It's a good lie, a believable lie, the kind of lie that Morrison and I had crafted carefully over hours of preparation because we knew this moment would come eventually, the moment when Dante would start asking questions about the late nights and the secretive phone calls and the way I've been pulling away from him even more than usual, building walls upon walls between us until our marriage bed might as well be separated by the Great Wall of China for all the intimacy we share. But as Dante begins to descend the stairs, with the fluid grace of a panther stalking through the jungle, each step measured and deliberate, and absolutely terrifying in its controlled precision. I realize that no lie in the world is good enough to satisfy a man who's built an empire on his ability to detect deception, the way sharks detect blood in water from miles away. He's closer now, close enough that I can see the way his jaw muscle ticks with barely restrained something. Rage, maybe, or disappointment, or perhaps that deadly combination of both that has led to men disappearing in the middle of the night, never to be seen again except as cautionary tales whispered in dark corners of Italian restaurants in Little Italy. The gun is still in his hand, still dangling with that terrible casualness that somehow makes it more threatening than if he were pointing it directly at my head. And I find myself cataloging every possible exit route even though I know in my heart that there's no escape from a man like Dante Vittorio. Not in this house that he's turned into a fortress. Not in this city that bows to his will. Not in this life that became his property the moment my father traded me like a prize mare to secure peace between our families, after 3 years of bloodshed that left the streets of New York running red, and the morgues overflowing with bodies. My mother's charity, he repeats, and each word is enunciated with such precise care that they sound like individual threats. How thoughtful of you to remember such things, considering you've barely spoken 10 words to me in the past week, and you flinch every time I enter a room as if I'm some kind of monster who might devour you whole. He's standing in front of me now, so close that I can smell his cologne mixed with the scent of whiskey and something darker, something that might be gun oil or might be the metallic tang of violence that seems to cling to him like a second skin. And when he reaches out with his left hand, the one not holding the gun, to trace the line of my jaw with fingers that are surprisingly gentle despite the calluses that speak of years spent handling weapons and breaking bones, I have to lock my knees to keep from collapsing right there on his precious marble floors. You're trembling, he observes, and his voice has dropped to something lower, something more intimate, and therefore infinitely more dangerous. Why would a simple question about your evening make you shake like a leaf in a hurricane, Tesoro, unless there's something about this charity gala that you're not telling me? The gun barrel is cold against my skin now, tracing the same path his fingers just traveled, from my jaw down the column of my throat to rest against the hollow, where my pulse is beating out a frantic rhythm that surely betrays every secret I'm trying so desperately to keep. And I close my eyes for just a moment, gathering the tattered remains of my courage like a cloak around my shoulders. I'm trembling because you're holding a gun to my throat at 2 a.m, I manage to say, opening my eyes to meet his gaze directly, even though it feels like staring into the heart of a supernova. Even in a marriage as unconventional as ours, I think that's grounds for some nervousness. Something flickers across his face, something that might be hurt, or might be anger, or might be some twisted combination that I don't have the emotional vocabulary to name. And for just a second, I see beneath the mask of the untouchable Mafia boss to the man underneath. The man who might have been different in another life, in another world where our families weren't built on blood and violence and territory disputes that go back generations. But then it's gone, replaced by that cold, calculating expression that has made him one of the most feared men in the underworld. And when he speaks again, his voice has lost even that pretense of warmth. You're not wearing your wedding ring, he states. And it's not a question but an accusation. And I glance down at my bare left hand with a sinking sensation in my stomach because I'd been so focused on making sure the wire Morrison gave me was properly hidden in my clutch that I'd completely forgotten the most obvious detail. The one piece of evidence that screams my disloyalty, louder than any recording device ever could. I took it off to wash my hands and forgot to put it back on. I lie. But even I can hear how weak it sounds, how transparent and pathetic. And Dante's laugh is sharp enough to draw blood, cold enough to freeze the very air in my lungs. You forgot, he repeats. And the gun traces lower now, down to the neckline of my dress, this sequined midnight blue creation that Morrison insisted I wear, because it photographed well, and would help establish my cover story. But now I'm wondering if the real reason was to distract Dante, to give him something to focus on, besides the lies tumbling from my lips like poisoned pearls. You forgot the symbol of our union, the physical representation of the vows you spoke in front of God and our families, the ring that cost more than most people make in a year. But you remembered to curl your hair and put on your most expensive dress and perfume that I definitely did not buy you. My heart actually stops beating for a full second, because the perfume was a gift from Morrison, something he said would help me seem more sophisticated and cultured when I needed to blend in at upscale venues. And I'd been so careful about everything else that I'd forgotten such a simple detail could betray me. "I want you to undress," Dante says suddenly, stepping back and gesturing with the gun in a way that makes it clear this isn't a request but a command. And his eyes have gone flat and emotionless, the way they get right before he orders someone's execution. "Right here, right now, I want to see exactly what you wore for whoever you were really with tonight. Because we both know that my mother's charity hasn't held a gala in 3 years, not since I shut it down after discovering the director was embezzling funds." The world tilts sideways, and I grab the console table next to me for support as the reality of my situation crashes over me like a tsunami of ice water. Because he knows. He's always known. This whole confrontation has been him playing with me the way a cat plays with a mouse before the final, fatal pounce. And I'm opening my mouth to say something. Anything. To try to salvage this disaster. Or at least buy myself enough time to think of a way out. When his phone erupts with a shrill ringtone that shatters the tension like a gunshot through glass. Dante's eyes narrow as he pulls the phone from his pocket, and I watch the colors shift across his face as he reads whatever message has come through. Watch the cold anger transform into something harder, something deadly. And when he looks at me again, there's a promise in his gaze that makes me want to run screaming into the night. "Salvatore has been murdered," he says flatly, naming one of his top capos, one of the men who helped arrange our marriage. Shot twice in the head execution style in his own driveway, while his wife and children slept inside. He's moving toward the door, already pulling on the shirt that one of his ever-present guards materializes with as if from thin air. But before he leaves, he turns back to me with an expression that's somehow worse than anger, somehow more terrifying than rage. "Don't think this conversation is over, Camilla," he says, and my name on his lips sounds like a funeral dirge. "When I get back, you and I are going to have a much longer discussion about trust and loyalty and the consequences of betrayal in my world." The door slams behind him with the finality of a coffin lid closing, and I sink to the floor in my expensive dress and my treacherous perfume, my clutch still tucked under my arm with the wire inside that could destroy everything. And I realize with absolute clarity that I have maybe 3 hours before he returns. 3 hours to figure out how to survive the wrath of a man who's killed for far less than lying to his face. 3 hours to decide if I'm going to run or fight, or simply wait for the inevitable judgment that's coming for me like a freight train with no brakes and no mercy. The moment the sound of Dante's car engine fades into the night, swallowed by the darkness beyond the iron gates that surround this marble prison I've called home for 6 months, I'm on my feet and moving with the kind of desperate urgency that comes from knowing your life hangs by a thread so thin that even breathing too hard might snap it. And my first coherent thought, through the panic that's threatening to drown me, is that I need to destroy the wire, need to smash it into pieces so small that not even Dante's most thorough search could find evidence of my betrayal. I practically tear the clutch open as I stumble up the stairs toward our bedroom, my hands shaking so badly that I drop the small beaded purse twice before I finally manage to get it unzipped. And when I dump the contents onto the massive California king bed that Dante and I share in body but never in spirit, when I see my lipstick and compact and credit cards scatter across the black silk sheets, my blood turns to ice in my veins because the wire isn't there. The small recording device that Morrison assured me was undetectable and foolproof is simply gone, as if it never existed at all. I tear through the clutch again, checking every pocket and seam with increasingly frantic movements that border on hysteria. Then I'm on my hands and knees on the floor, searching under the bed, under the nightstands, anywhere the device might have fallen during my panicked rush up the stairs. But there's nothing. Absolutely nothing. And the implications of this absence hit me like a physical blow that leaves me gasping for air that suddenly seems too thick to breathe. Did Dante take it when he was standing so close to me in the foyer? His fingers and his gun tracing paths along my skin while I was too terrified to notice his other hand slipping into my purse, with the practiced ease of a man who spent his entire life stealing things that don't belong to him. Or did I lose it somewhere between the parking garage where I met Morrison 3 hours ago and this moment of reckoning? Did it fall out in Dante's car or on the driveway, or in some other location where someone might find it and realize exactly what it is and what it means? The panic is a living thing now, clawing its way up my throat and threatening to spill out in screams that would wake the entire household staff. The guards who patrol the grounds, the soldiers who sleep in the guest house ready to respond to Dante's every command. And I press both hands over my mouth to keep the sound contained, even as tears of pure terror stream down my face and ruin the makeup that took me 45 minutes to apply before my meeting with Morrison. Before everything went so catastrophically wrong that I can't even see a path forward through the disaster my life has become. I need to think, need to breathe, need to figure out what to do in the precious little time I have before Dante returns from dealing with Salvatore's murder. And I force myself to stand on legs that feel like they're made of water instead of bone and muscle. Forced myself to strip out of this damn dress that was supposed to be my armor, but turned out to be just another layer of deception that Dante saw through as easily as reading a children's book. I'm reaching for the zipper when I notice something I've never paid attention to before in all the months I've lived in this room. A slight irregularity in the wood paneling of the massive walk-in closet that takes up the entire western wall of the bedroom. A seam that doesn't quite match up with the others in a way that might be nothing or might be everything. And before I can talk myself out of it, before I can remember all the reasons why exploring Dante's secrets, when he's already suspicious of me, is possibly the worst idea I've ever had. My fingers are pressing against the panel and feeling it give way beneath my touch. The hidden door swings open silently on well-oiled hinges, revealing a narrow passageway that's barely wider than my shoulders, and the darkness beyond seems to pulse with the promise of answers to questions I've been too afraid to ask. Secrets that might either save me or condemn me depending on what I find in whatever lies at the end of this concealed corridor. I should turn back, should close the door and pretend I never found it, should use these precious hours to pack a bag and run as far and as fast as I can before Dante returns with blood on his hands and murder in his eyes. But something deeper than logic, some instinct that's kept me alive through everything my life has thrown at me, tells me that running now would be the worst possible choice, that whatever is hidden behind this door might be the only thing that can save me from the consequences of my own stupid decisions. The passageway leads to another door, this one reinforced steel with a biometric lock that should be impossible to bypass. But Dante clearly never considered that I might find this entrance because the door is standing open just a crack, as if he left in such a hurry that he forgot his usual paranoid security protocols. And I slip through into what can only be described as his inner sanctum, his private office where he conducts the business that's too sensitive or too violent or too incriminating to handle in the more public spaces of the house. The room is everything I would expect from a man like Dante. All dark wood and leather and technology that probably cost more than a small country's GDP, with multiple monitors displaying security feeds from what looks like every corner of his empire, and filing cabinets that undoubtedly contain enough evidence to put half of New York's criminal underground behind bars for life. And I know I should leave. Know I should get out before someone discovers I'm here. But my feet are already carrying me toward his desk, where a folder lies open, as if he'd been reviewing it right before he got the call about Salvatore. The label on the folder makes my stomach drop because it's simply one word, Morrison, and when I flip it open with trembling fingers, when I see the surveillance photos of Agent James Morrison spanning what looks like years, not months, including pictures of him meeting with known criminals and accepting envelopes that can only contain cash and emerging from buildings that I know from my own research are fronts for human trafficking operations. I feel the foundation of everything I thought I knew crack and crumble beneath my feet, like a sandcastle hit by a tsunami. But it's not the photos of Morrison that make my knees buckle and force me to grip the edge of Dante's desk to keep from collapsing. It's the other folder underneath. The one with my name written in Dante's distinctive handwriting. And when I open it with hands that have moved beyond shaking into some kind of palsy that makes it almost impossible to turn pages, I see my entire life laid out in surveillance photos and investigative reports and transcripts of conversations I thought were private. There are photos of every meeting I've had with Morrison over the past 3 months, time-stamped and annotated with notes in Dante's handwriting that make it clear he's known about my betrayal from the very beginning, that he's been watching me play spy with the kind of amused patience a scientist might show when observing a particularly stupid lab rat try to navigate a maze that has no exit. And the humiliation of this discovery is almost worse than the fear because it means every small victory I thought I'd won, every piece of information I thought I'd successfully passed to the FBI, was part of some larger game that Dante has been playing with me as his unwitting pawn. I'm so absorbed in the horror of this revelation, so completely devastated by the realization that I've been compromised from the start, that I don't hear the footsteps in the hallway until it's too late. Don't register that someone is approaching until the door to the office swings open and Dante is standing there in the threshold, like an avenging angel dressed in black. His shirt splattered with what I very much hope is someone else's blood. His face a mask of cold fury that makes the earlier confrontation in the foyer look like a friendly chat over tea. Did you find what you were looking for, Traditrice? The word is Italian for traitor, and it drips from his lips like acid, burning away any pretense of civility that might have existed between us. And I realize with a clarity that borders on the absurd that this is it. This is the moment where everything ends, where the consequences of my choices finally catch up to me in a way that can't be deflected or explained away, or smoothed over with more lies piled on top of the mountain of deception I've already built. I open my mouth to say something, to explain or defend or maybe just to beg for my life. But Dante is already moving into the room with that predatory grace that never fails to remind me that he's a hunter, and I'm prey, and he's reaching for something on his desk. And I'm absolutely certain that this is when he pulls out a gun and puts a bullet in my brain, the way he's done to countless others who've betrayed him. But instead of a weapon, he picks up a remote control and points it at the largest monitor on the wall, and the screen flickers to life, showing footage that makes my heart stop beating and my lungs forget how to process oxygen, because I'm watching my brother, my beautiful, reckless brother Marcus, who died 2 years ago in what I was told was a territorial dispute between families. I'm watching him on his knees in what looks like an abandoned warehouse, while Agent Morrison stands over him with a gun. Your brother, Dante says, and his voice has lost the sharp edge of anger and become something flat and factual, the tone of someone presenting evidence in a court where the verdict has already been decided. Was working with one of my intelligence operatives to investigate a human trafficking ring that was operating out of the Port District. A ring that was bringing in girls as young as 12 and selling them to the highest bidder, and he got too close to the truth. Too close to discovering that the operation was being protected by dirty federal agents who were taking a cut of the profits in exchange for looking the other way. On the screen, I watch Morrison say something to my brother. Watch Marcus shake his head in defiance even though he must have known he was about to die. And then the gun goes off, and my brother's body crumples to the concrete floor, like a puppet with its strings cut. And Morrison is stepping over the corpse with no more concern than if he'd just swatted a fly. And the sound that comes out of my throat is something between a scream and a sob, and a sound that no human should ever have to make. I've known about Morrison for 3 years, Dante continues, and he's moved closer now. Close enough that I can feel the heat radiating from his body, can smell the copper tang of blood mixed with his cologne. I've been building a case against him and his entire network of corrupt agents, collecting evidence that would not only put him away for life, but bring down everyone in his organization. And then you walked into my life through an arranged marriage neither of us wanted. And I saw in your eyes the same look your brother had, that burning need for vengeance disguised as justice. And I knew it was only a matter of time before Morrison approached you and turned you into his weapon against me. I'm shaking my head, trying to process this flood of information that contradicts everything Morrison told me. Everything I believed about my brother's death and Dante's role in the violence that plagues our world. But the evidence is right there on the screen, undeniable and horrifying. And when I finally manage to find my voice, it comes out as a broken whisper that barely qualifies as speech. He told me you killed Marcus, I say, and each word feels like swallowing ground glass. He showed me crime scene photos and ballistics reports and witness statements that all pointed to your organization, and he said if I helped him bring you down, if I got close enough to gather evidence, then my brother's death wouldn't have been in vain. Everything Morrison showed you was fabricated, Dante says, and there's something in his eyes now that I've never seen before. Something that might be sympathy, or might be pity, or might be some combination that I don't have the emotional bandwidth to examine. He's been running this operation for over a decade, using his position with the FBI to not only protect criminals, but to actively eliminate anyone who gets too close to exposing him. And your brother was just one name on a very long list of people who died because they believed in something as naive as justice in a world that doesn't reward idealism. He's holding out his hand to me now, palm up in a gesture that could be interpreted as offering help or demanding submission. And his next words come out with an intensity that makes them feel like a vow or a threat, or perhaps both simultaneously. You have a choice to make, Camilla, and you need to make it right now because I don't have the luxury of time or patience with Salvatore dead and Morrison clearly making moves against my organization, he says. And his storm gray eyes are boring into mine with an intensity that makes it impossible to look away. You can continue to believe the lies that a corrupt federal agent fed you, continue to think of me as the monster who destroyed your family, and I will put a bullet in your brain and dump your body in the Hudson River before sunrise because I cannot afford to have a traitor in my house, in my bed, in my life. The silence that follows this statement stretches out like taffy being pulled to its breaking point, and I'm aware of every breath I take, every beat of my heart, every second that ticks by on the antique clock in the corner that belonged to Dante's grandfather, and probably witnessed 100 similar moments where life and death hung in the balance based on someone's choice. Or, Dante continues, and that single word hangs in the air like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. You can accept that everything you thought you knew was a lie, that I am not your enemy but perhaps the only ally you have left in this world, and you can help me destroy the man who actually killed your brother, help me dismantle the organization that's been profiting off the suffering of innocent people, and in the process, maybe, possibly, we can figure out if this marriage of convenience that neither of us wanted might actually become something real. The weight of this decision, the impossible choice between the narrative I've clung to for 2 years and the evidence of my own eyes, between the desire for vengeance and the terrifying possibility of having been completely wrong about everything, settles over me like a lead blanket that makes it hard to breathe or think or do anything except stare at Dante's outstretched hand and wonder if taking it means salvation or damnation. And when I finally speak, my voice is steady, despite the chaos raging inside my head and heart. If I help you, I say, and I'm surprised by how calm I sound, how controlled, as if some part of me has already made the decision and is just waiting for the rest of me to catch up. If I agree to this insane proposition, I want something in return beyond just surviving until morning. Dante's eyebrow arches in what might be surprise or might be respect, and he tilts his head slightly in a gesture that invites me to continue, to state my terms like I actually have any negotiating power in this situation where he literally holds my life in his hands. I want you to teach me everything, I say, and the words are tumbling out now in a rush of determination born from rage and grief and the sudden clarity that comes from having nothing left to lose. Not just how to help you take down Morrison, not just how to survive in your world, but how to thrive in it, how to be more than just the pretty wife you parade around at functions, how to be your actual partner in every sense of the word, because if I'm going to betray everything I thought I believed in, if I'm going to help you wage war against federal agents and criminal organizations, then I'm not going to do it as some helpless damsel who needs protecting. Something shifts in Dante's expression, something that transforms his face from the cold mask of the Mafia boss into something more human, more real. And when he finally responds, his voice carries a note of what might be admiration mixed with dark amusement. "You want to become a queen in a kingdom built on blood and violence and power," he says. "And it's not a question but a statement that hangs between us like a challenge or a promise, or perhaps both. You want me to turn you into the kind of woman who can stand beside me not as a decoration but as an equal, someone who can make the hard choices and pull the trigger when necessary, and sleep soundly afterward knowing that what we do, however dark it might be, serves a purpose greater than ourselves." "Yes," I say, and the single syllable comes out strong and clear and absolutely certain. Because somewhere in the past few minutes, somewhere between discovering Morrison's betrayal and seeing the evidence of my brother's real murder and being offered this impossible choice, I've realized that the girl I was when I walked through the door 6 months ago is dead, burned away by rage and grief and the fire of this moment. And whoever I'm becoming in her place is someone new, someone harder, someone who understands that in a world this dark, the only way to survive is to become darkness itself. Dante's hand closes around mine, and his grip is firm and warm and somehow feels like sealing a pact with the devil himself, except instead of selling my soul, I'm reclaiming it on my own terms. And when he pulls me closer, close enough that I can see the flecks of gold in his gray eyes and feel his breath against my lips, he speaks words that sound like both a warning and a vow. "Then we seal this the way my family has sealed agreements for 5 generations, he says. And before I can ask what he means, he's producing a knife from somewhere in his jacket, a wicked-looking blade that gleams in the low light of his office. "Blood oath, traditrice turned ally, your blood mixed with mine, binding us together in a way that transcends marriage certificates and legal documents, binding us in a way that can only be broken by death itself." The knife gleams in Dante's hand like a sliver of moonlight given form and purpose, and I find myself mesmerized by the way the blade catches the light from the monitors behind us, creating dancing shadows across his face that make him look even more like some ancient god of war and vengeance than the mortal man he supposedly is. And I realize with a clarity that feels almost dreamlike that this is the moment where I truly choose my path. Not the moment I agreed to help Morrison in some misguided attempt at justice. Not the moment I walked down the aisle in a designer wedding dress to marry a man I'd been taught to hate. But this moment right here where I willingly offer my blood to bind myself to Dante Vittorio in a ritual that his family has been performing since before America was even a country. "Your left hand," he instructs, and his voice has taken on a formal quality that makes this feel less like a spontaneous decision and more like a sacred ceremony that's been performed countless times before us. And I extend my hand without hesitation, watching with a strange detachment as he turns my palm upward and traces the knife along what I assume are the relevant lines, mapping out where he'll make the cut, with the precision of a surgeon who's done this operation 1,000 times. "This will hurt," he adds, and there's something almost gentle in the warning, a consideration for my pain that seems at odds with everything I thought I knew about him. But the pain is part of the ritual, part of what makes the oath binding, because something that costs us nothing has no value, and what we're about to do, the alliance we're about to forge, needs to have weight and meaning and consequence. I nod my understanding because words feel inadequate for this moment, and when the blade cuts into my palm in one swift, decisive motion, the pain is sharp and immediate but somehow clarifying, burning away the last remnants of the scared girl I used to be, and leaving behind something forged in fire and blood and desperation. I watch my blood well up from the cut, dark red and viscous in the low light, and I don't flinch or pull away even though every instinct screams at me to protect myself from further harm, because I understand on some primal level that this pain is nothing compared to what's coming. That if I'm going to survive in Dante's world, I need to learn to embrace suffering as just another tool in my arsenal. Dante makes the same cut on his own palm, without even a flicker of discomfort crossing his features, as if pain is such an old friend that he barely notices its presence anymore. And then he's pressing our bleeding palms together, his fingers intertwining with mine in a grip that's somehow more intimate than any kiss we've shared in our 6 months of loveless marriage. I, Dante Alessandro Vittorio, take you, Camilla Rose Marchesi Vittorio, as my true partner in all things, he says. And the words have the weight of ritual behind them, the cadence of something that's been spoken in this exact way for generations. I pledge to you my protection, my resources, my knowledge, and my loyalty, bound by blood and witnessed by the spirits of my ancestors who built this empire on the principle that family, chosen or born, is the only thing in this world worth dying for. His eyes are locked on mine with an intensity that makes it impossible to look away, and I can feel the heat of his blood mixing with mine, can feel something fundamental shifting in the space between us. And when he nods slightly to indicate it's my turn to speak, I find that the words come easily despite never having heard this oath before, as if they're rising from somewhere deep in my genetic memory. Some part of me that understands the language of blood and binding and choices that can never be unmade. I, Camilla Rose Marchesi Vittorio, accept your partnership and offer mine in return, I say, and my voice is steady and strong, the voice of a woman who's decided to stop being a victim and start being something far more dangerous. I pledge to you my loyalty, my courage, my cunning, and my vengeance, bound by blood and witnessed by the memory of my brother, whose death will not be in vain, whose sacrifice will be honored by bringing down the monsters who profit from innocent suffering. Something passes between us in that moment, something that transcends the physical sensation of our blood mingling and our pulses beating in synchronization, where our palms press together. And I see something in Dante's eyes that I've never seen before, a vulnerability that he usually keeps locked away behind layers of cold calculation and controlled violence. And I realize that this oath means something to him beyond just securing an alliance, that perhaps on some level he's been waiting for someone who could stand beside him as an equal, rather than cowering in his shadow or attempting to destroy him from within. The oath is sealed, he says quietly, and there's a reverence in his tone that makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. And now, Camilla, now we begin the real work of transforming you from a woman who was used as a pawn in someone else's game into a queen who makes her own moves and controls her own destiny. He releases my hand finally, and I watch as he wraps both our palms in strips of clean white cloth that he produces from a drawer in his desk, binding our wounds with a gentleness that seems at odds with the violence I know he's capable of. And when he's finished, he moves to a cabinet in the corner and retrieves a bottle of what looks like very expensive whiskey, along with 2 crystal glasses that probably cost more than my childhood home. We drink to seal the bond, he explains as he pours 2 generous measures of amber liquid. And then I show you something that will help you understand exactly what we're fighting against, exactly what Morrison and his network have been doing while hiding behind federal badges and claims of justice. The whiskey burn's going down, but it's a good burn. A cleansing fire that seems to mark the end of one chapter of my life and the beginning of another. And when Dante leads me to a different monitor and begins pulling up files that make my stomach turn and my rage ignite into something white-hot and all-consuming, I understand why he needed the oath first, why he needed to bind me to him before showing me the depths of Morrison's depravity. The files contain evidence of dozens, maybe hundreds of girls who've been trafficked through Morrison's network over the past decade. Young women and teenagers who disappeared from their lives and ended up as commodities to be bought and sold by men who see human beings as disposable products. And the surveillance footage shows Morrison personally involved in the operations, not just looking the other way, but actively facilitating the movement of these victims, collecting his payments with a smile on his face while girls young enough to be his daughters were being destroyed in ways that no human should ever have to endure. Your brother found evidence of 3 specific transactions, Dante says, and his voice is cold with barely controlled fury. 3 shipments of girls, ages 12 to 17, that came through the port under Morrison's protection, and Marcus was building a case that would have exposed not just Morrison, but at least 15 other federal agents who were part of the operation, along with politicians and businessmen, and even a few judges who were either participating in the trafficking or being blackmailed into silence. I can't look away from the screen, even though every image is like a knife to my heart. Even though I want to close my eyes and pretend I never saw these faces, these young women whose lives were stolen by the very people who were supposed to protect them. And when I finally speak, my voice is hoarse with unshed tears and rage that has nowhere to go except inward, burning away any remaining doubt about whether I'm making the right choice. "Why didn't you go public with this?" I demand, turning to face Dante with something that probably looks like accusation. "Why didn't you take this evidence to someone who could actually do something about it, instead of just collecting files and surveillance footage while more girls disappeared into this nightmare?" The look Dante gives me is complicated, layered with emotions I can't fully parse. But there's pain there. Real, genuine pain that tells me this question has haunted him as much as the answer clearly haunts me. "Because the corruption goes deeper than you can possibly imagine," he says. And he pulls up more files, these ones showing connections between Morrison's network and people whose names I recognize from news broadcasts and political campaigns and business sections of newspapers. Because every time someone has tried to expose this operation through official channels, they've ended up dead or discredited or disappeared so thoroughly that it's like they never existed. And because I learned a long time ago that sometimes the only way to fight monsters is to become something even more monstrous, to build your own empire of violence and fear and power, so that when you finally strike, when you finally bring down the hammer of justice, there's no one left who can stop you or protect the guilty. He moves closer to me, close enough that I can see the way his jaw clenches with suppressed emotion, close enough that I can feel the heat radiating from his body. And when he continues speaking, his words carry the weight of confession, as if he's revealing something he's never told anyone else. "I could have been legitimate," he says, and there's something almost wistful in his tone. "I inherited my father's empire when I was 23, and I could have transitioned us into legal businesses, could have cleaned up the family name and become just another wealthy businessman with a questionable past. But then I learned about the trafficking, learned about Morrison and his network, learned about all the ways that the so-called good guys were actually worse than any mafia family could ever be. And I realized that my resources, my connections, my willingness to operate outside the law, these things made me uniquely qualified to fight a war that no one else was willing to wage. I'm seeing him differently now, this man I married while hating him, this man I've spent 6 months trying to betray. And I'm realizing that the monster I thought I knew was actually far more complex than the simple villain Morrison had painted him to be. That perhaps in this world of moral ambiguity and shifting allegiances, the traditional definitions of good and evil are so hopelessly tangled that the only way to navigate is by choosing which darkness you're willing to embrace. "You've been investigating this for 3 years, I say, and it's not a question, but a statement of understanding. You've been systematically dismantling Morrison's network piece by piece, taking out the corrupt officials and the businessmen and the traffickers, and everyone just thinks it's regular mob violence, territorial disputes and power struggles, when really you've been waging a war that no one else even knows is happening." "Salvatore was helping me," Dante admits, and the pain in his voice when he says his dead capo's name is raw and real. He lost his niece to the trafficking network 5 years ago, a girl who was grabbed off the street in broad daylight and never seen again. And when he brought the evidence to the police, to the FBI, they told him there was nothing they could do, that she was probably a runaway or got mixed up with the wrong people, and 6 months later we found her body in a shipping container at the port, used up and discarded like trash because she'd gotten too old, or too damaged, or too difficult to control. The image his words paint is so horrific that I have to grip the edge of his desk to keep my knees from buckling. And I think about all the families who've lost daughters and sisters and friends to this nightmare. All the people who trusted the system to protect them, only to discover that the system itself was the predator. And my rage transforms into something colder, something more focused, something that feels like purpose crystallizing out of chaos. "So we destroy them," I say, and the certainty in my voice surprises even me. We use whatever resources you have, whatever connections I can still exploit with Morrison, and we burn his entire operation to the ground in a way that ensures he can never rebuild, that ensures everyone knows exactly what he did and who he really was. And we do it in a way that honors my brother and Salvatore's niece and every other victim who deserves justice even if they can't be here to see it delivered. Dante nods slowly, and there's approval in his expression. Respect for the transformation he's witnessing in me. This metamorphosis from frightened pawn to determined player, and when he speaks again, his voice carries a note of warning mixed with dark anticipation. Morrison will reach out to you within the next 48 hours, he says, pulling up what looks like intercepted communications on another monitor. He's expecting you to have gathered significant intelligence during your time as my wife, and he'll want to meet, to collect whatever you've supposedly learned, and to give you your next assignment. And this meeting will be our opportunity to feed him exactly the kind of information that will make him overconfident, that will make him believe he's finally about to bring down the Vittorio Empire, when in reality, he's walking straight into a trap that will destroy everything he's built. The weight of what we're about to do settles over me like a cloak, heavy and dark, but somehow fitting, as if this is what I was always meant to become, as if every choice I've made and every tragedy I've endured has been leading me to this moment where I finally stop being reactive and start being proactive, where I finally stop letting other people control my narrative and start writing my own story even if it has to be written in blood. What do you need me to do? I ask, and I'm already running through scenarios in my head, already thinking like the strategist I'm going to need to become if I'm going to survive this war we're about to wage. First, Dante says, and he's moving toward me now with that predatory grace that used to terrify me, but now feels like something else. Something that might be partnership, or might be the recognition of a kindred spirit. I need you to understand that once we start this, once we commit to this path, there's no going back, no changing your mind, no deciding that the cost is too high or the methods are too dark, because Morrison won't give us a second chance, and if we fail, if we show even a moment of weakness or hesitation, he'll kill us both in ways that will make a simple bullet to the head seem merciful. He's standing directly in front of me now, close enough that I would only need to lean forward slightly to close the distance between us, and there's something in his eyes that I've never seen before, something that might be desire or might be the recognition that we're no longer just two people trapped in an arranged marriage, but two allies bound by blood and purpose, and the shared understanding that we're both probably going to hell, but at least we'll be going there together. I understand, I say, and I reach up to touch his face with my bandaged hand, feeling the rough stubble of his jaw beneath my fingers. I understand that this makes me complicit in everything you do, every violent act and every moral compromise, and I understand that there's a very good chance we'll both end up dead before this is over. But I also understand that living the rest of my life knowing I could have done something to stop Morrison and his network but chose safety instead would be a different kind of death, a slower and more painful one that would eat away at my soul until there was nothing left. Something shifts in Dante's expression, the careful control slipping for just a moment to reveal the man beneath the mask. And when he speaks, his voice is rough with an emotion I can't quite name. I've been waiting, he says, and the confession hangs between us like something fragile and dangerous. Since the moment I saw you at your brother's funeral, standing there in your black dress with rage and grief radiating from you like heat from a fire, I've been waiting for you to stop looking at me like I'm the monster who destroyed your world and start seeing me as what I actually am, someone who's trying to fight monsters even if it means becoming one in the process. The kiss, when it comes, is nothing like the perfunctory gestures of affection we've exchanged in public. Nothing like the cold mechanical joining of bodies we've managed on the handful of occasions when our marriage required consummation for appearance's sake. But instead it's something raw and desperate and real. A collision of two people who've been circling each other like wounded animals and have finally decided to either destroy each other or become something greater than the sum of their individual broken parts. His hands are in my hair. Mine are gripping his blood-stained shirt, and we're kissing like we're drowning, and each other's breath is the only thing that can save us. Kissing like this is the seal on something far more binding than any blood oath could ever be. When we finally break apart, both breathing hard, both shaking slightly from the intensity of whatever just passed between us, Dante rests his forehead against mine and speaks words that sound like both a promise and a threat. "I will teach you everything I know," he says, his voice low and intense. "I will teach you how to shoot, how to fight, how to read people and manipulate situations and survive in a world that wants to destroy anyone who refuses to play by its rules, and I will make you into the kind of queen who can stand beside me not as decoration, but as my equal in all things, my partner in this empire we're building, and this war we're fighting." And when it's over, I say, pulling back just enough to look into his eyes, to see the truth written there in shades of gray and gold. When Morrison is destroyed and his network is dismantled and every victim has been avenged as much as the dead can ever be avenged, what happens to us then? To this partnership we've forged in blood and violence and shared purpose. The smile Dante gives me is small and sad, and somehow hopeful all at once. And when he answers, his words carry the weight of truth, even though we both know the future is never certain, especially not for people like us, who've chosen to wage war against forces that most people don't even know exist. Then we figure out if what we've built can survive in peacetime, he says. We figure out if this thing between us, whatever it is, whatever it's becoming, is real enough to exist outside the context of revenge and necessity, or if we're just two broken people who found each other in the darkness and mistook desperation for something more. The honesty of his answer, the willingness to acknowledge that neither of us knows where this path leads or what we'll become by walking it together, somehow makes me trust him more than any pretty promises or declarations of love ever could. And when I kiss him again, it's softer this time, less desperate but somehow more meaningful. A promise that whatever happens, whatever we become in the process of fighting this war, we'll face it together as partners bound by something stronger than any legal document or romantic sentiment could ever be. 7 days have passed since the night Dante and I sealed our alliance in blood and discovered that the space between hatred and something far more dangerous is thinner than either of us could have imagined. 7 days of intensive training, where he's transformed me from a woman who flinched at the sound of gunfire into someone who can field strip a Glock in under 30 seconds and put 3 rounds center mass at 50 yards. 7 days of learning to read micro-expressions and body language, and the subtle tells that reveal when someone is lying or afraid or planning violence. And now I'm standing in front of the full-length mirror in our bedroom, wearing a dress the color of fresh blood. My hair styled in loose waves that took an hour to perfect. My makeup applied with the kind of precision that makes me look simultaneously innocent and devastating. And I can feel Dante's eyes on me from where he sits on the edge of our bed, watching me prepare for what might be the most dangerous performance of my life, with an intensity that makes my skin prickle with awareness. "Morrison wants to meet at Russo's at 8, I say, and my voice is steady despite the adrenaline already starting to pump through my system, despite the wire that's been carefully taped to my ribcage by one of Dante's technical specialists, who assured me it's undetectable even if Morrison decides to get handsy. He thinks I've been gathering intelligence on your operations, thinks I'm finally ready to give him something substantial enough to move forward with taking you down, and he has no idea that every piece of information I'm about to feed him has been carefully crafted to lead him exactly where we want him to go." Dante stands and crosses the room with that fluid, predatory grace that I've learned to associate with him preparing for violence. And when he reaches me, his hands settle on my hips with a possessiveness that would have terrified me 2 weeks ago, but now sends an entirely different kind of heat coursing through my veins. "You look like sin wrapped in silk," he murmurs against my ear, and I can feel the tension radiating from him, the barely controlled jealousy that comes from knowing I'm about to walk into the arms of the man who murdered my brother, the man who's been using me as an unwitting weapon. "Morrison won't be able to think straight with you dressed like this, which is exactly what we want. But that doesn't mean I have to like the idea of him looking at you, touching you, thinking even for a second that he has any claim to you whatsoever." I turn in his arms so I can meet his eyes, so I can see the storm clouds gathering there that speak of violence barely leashed. And I reach up to straighten his tie even though he's not coming with me. Even though his role in tonight's operation is to monitor everything from a distance and be ready to extract me if things go sideways in ways we haven't anticipated. He can look all he wants, I say, and there's a dark confidence in my voice that surprises even me. A certainty born from the past week of intensive training and the knowledge that I'm no longer the frightened pawn who stumbled into Dante's foyer 7 days ago. He can even touch if he tries, but he'll never have what's yours, what I've chosen to give you. And when this is over, when we've destroyed him and everything he's built, I'm going to take immense satisfaction in knowing that his last conscious thought will be the realization that he never stood a chance. The kiss Dante gives me is bruising and desperate, a claiming that leaves my lips swollen and my carefully applied lipstick smeared. And when he pulls back, there's something almost feral in his expression, something that reminds me that beneath the expensive suits and the careful control, he's still a man who's built an empire on violence and isn't afraid to burn the world down to protect what's his. "Come back to me," he says. And it's not a command, but a plea. Perhaps the first time I've ever heard him ask for something rather than demand it. Play your role perfectly. Feed him the lies we've prepared. Get him to reveal his plans for the meeting where he thinks he'll finally take me down. But when it's done, when you've gotten what we need, you come back to me, Camilla. Because I'm not ready to lose another person I care about to Morrison's corruption. The admission that he cares about me, that somewhere in the past week of training and planning and learning to trust each other, we've crossed some invisible line from allies of convenience to something more genuine, sits between us like a living thing. And I want to stay in this moment, want to explore what it means and where it might lead. But the clock on the wall tells me I have exactly 45 minutes to get to Russo's, and if I'm late, Morrison will be suspicious. Will start asking questions that I can't afford to answer. I'll come back, I promise, and I mean it with every fiber of my being. Mean it in a way that transcends the practical considerations of our mission and touches something deeper, something that feels dangerously close to the kind of emotion I swore I'd never feel for a man like Dante Vittorio. I'll play the desperate wife who wants out of this marriage. I'll give him everything he needs to believe that his plan is working perfectly, and then I'll come back to you and we'll finish what we started. The drive to Russo's is a blur of city lights and racing thoughts, my mind running through every possible scenario and contingency plan that Dante and I have rehearsed over the past week. And when I finally pull into the parking lot of the upscale Italian restaurant that Morrison chose for this meeting, I take a moment to center myself, to slide into the role of the frightened, desperate woman who's been gathering intelligence on her dangerous husband and is finally ready to betray him completely. Morrison is already waiting at a private table in the back when I arrive, his federal agent disguise of conservative suit and clean-cut appearance doing nothing to hide the predator lurking beneath. And when he stands to greet me with a smile that probably charms most people, but only makes my skin crawl with revulsion, I force myself to return the expression with what I hope looks like relief mixed with fear. "Camilla," he says, and his hand on my lower back as he guides me to my seat feels like a violation even through the fabric of my dress. "You look absolutely stunning tonight. Though I have to admit I'm surprised you'd risk dressing so provocatively when you're supposed to be maintaining your cover as Vittorio's dutiful wife." I sit down and accept the wine he's already ordered, taking a small sip to buy myself time to deliver my first lie with the perfect blend of desperation and determination that will make him believe every word that follows. "Dante barely notices what I wear anymore," I say, and I let my voice crack just slightly. Let him see what he wants to see, which is a neglected wife who's reached her breaking point. We haven't shared a bed in weeks, not since he became obsessed with this meeting he's planning with his top lieutenants, and I've been able to access his private office, his files, everything you said you needed to finally build a case that will put him away for life. Morrison leans forward, and I can see the greed and anticipation in his eyes, can see him already counting the accolades and promotions he thinks he'll receive for bringing down one of the most powerful crime families on the East Coast. and I have to fight to keep the disgust off my face as I feed him exactly what Dante and I have prepared. He's planning a meeting, I continue, and I pull out my phone to show him the falsified documents that Dante's people created, complete with details about locations and attendees and security protocols. All of his top people will be there, everyone who's been helping him run his operations, and if you can get federal agents positioned correctly, you could take down the entire organization in one night. The smile that spreads across Morrison's face is triumphant and ugly, and he reaches across the table to take my hand in a gesture that makes my stomach turn, but that I force myself to tolerate because this is exactly what we need. This overconfidence that will make him sloppy and predictable. "You've done beautifully," he says, and his thumb traces circles on my palm in a way that's clearly meant to be seductive, but only makes me want to break his fingers one by one. "When this is over, when Vittorio and his people are behind bars, I'll make sure you're protected. Make sure you get everything you deserve for your bravery in helping us bring down this criminal empire." We order food that I can barely taste, and Morrison spends the next hour revealing his plans for the raid on Dante's fabricated meeting, giving me every detail about positioning and timing and the backup teams he's assembled. And I nod and smile and play the grateful informant while the wire records every incriminating word that spills from his mouth. But then something shifts. Something in Morrison's demeanor becomes more aggressive, more proprietary. And when the waiter clears our plates, Morrison orders another bottle of wine despite my protests that I need to get home before Dante notices I'm gone. And I realize with growing alarm that he's testing me, pushing boundaries to see how far he can take things, how much control he actually has over me. "You know," he says, and his hand has moved from the table to my knee, sliding higher with an presumption that makes rage burn through my veins like acid. "When this is all over, when you're free of Vittorio, maybe you and I could explore what might develop between us, because I've admired you from the moment we started working together, admired your courage and your intelligence and your dedication to justice." The hypocrisy of hearing the word justice from the mouth of the man who killed my brother, who's been facilitating human trafficking for over a decade, who's about to discover that every assumption he's made about tonight has been catastrophically wrong, is almost enough to make me break character. Almost enough to make me reach for the gun Dante insisted I carry in my purse and put a bullet in Morrison's brain right here in this crowded restaurant. But then I hear Dante's voice in my earpiece, so quiet that only I can hear it, reminding me to stay calm, to stick to the plan, to remember that we need Morrison alive and talking if we're going to bring down his entire network. And I force myself to smile even as Morrison's hand continues its unwanted journey up my thigh. "Agent Morrison," I say, and I let steel enter my voice. Let him see that there are boundaries he's not going to cross no matter how cooperative I've been. "I appreciate everything you've done to help me escape my situation with Dante, but I think we should keep our relationship professional, at least until after the operation is complete." Something dangerous flashes in Morrison's eyes, something that tells me he's not used to being rejected, not used to women setting boundaries when he's decided he wants something, and his grip on my leg tightens to the point of pain as he leans in close enough that I can smell the wine on his breath. "I think you're forgetting who's in charge here," he says, and his voice has dropped to something threatening, something that makes it clear he's done playing the role of the supportive federal agent. "I think you're forgetting that without my protection, without my willingness to overlook certain inconsistencies in your story, you're just another mob wife who could find herself facing charges as an accessory to your husband's crimes." The threat hangs in the air between us, and I realize that Morrison has revealed more than he intended, has shown me the ugly truth that he's always seen me not as an ally, but as another asset to be controlled and exploited. And when I feel my phone buzz in my purse with the signal from Dante that means he's moving into position outside the restaurant, I know that the final act of tonight's performance is about to begin. The safe house where Dante has brought me after our narrow escape from Russo's is a nondescript brownstone in a neighborhood that probably looks charming and safe to normal people, but feels like a fortress to me, with armed guards stationed at every entrance and security systems that could rival a military installation. And as I sit on the leather couch in the main room, with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, despite the fact that the temperature is perfectly comfortable, watching Dante coordinate with his lieutenants about the final preparations for the trap we're setting for Morrison in exactly 72 hours, I'm struck by how much has changed in the 2 weeks since I walked through his door, believing he was my enemy, and discovering that the real monster had been wearing a federal badge all along. Morrison had gotten drunk at dinner, too confident in his perceived control over me to maintain his usual careful facade, and the recording device that had been capturing every word had picked up his confession about my brother's murder, had captured him, bragging about how easy it was to make Marcus's death look like mob violence, had recorded him detailing the trafficking operation with the kind of casual cruelty that made me want to vomit right there at the table, and when he'd tried to force himself on me in the restaurant's private dining room after sending the waiter away, when his hands had torn at my dress and his breath had been hot and disgusting against my neck, Dante had appeared like an avenging angel dressed in black, his fists moving with the kind of brutal efficiency that spoke of years of violence honed into an art form. The fight had been vicious and short, with Morrison's backup agents rushing in, only to find themselves outmaneuvered by Dante's soldiers, who had been positioned throughout the restaurant. And we'd escaped into the night with Morrison, screaming threats about how he'd hunt us down and destroy everything we loved, never realizing that his threats were being recorded by a dozen different devices, never understanding that he'd just given us everything we needed to not only destroy him, but to expose the entire network of corruption that had been festering in the federal system for over a decade. Now, 3 days before the meeting where Morrison thinks he'll finally take down the Vittorio Empire, 3 days before we spring our trap and end this war that's cost too many innocent lives, I'm watching Dante work with an efficiency and focus that's mesmerizing, his mind processing variables and contingencies faster than most people can follow a simple conversation. And I realize that somewhere in the past 2 weeks, somewhere between learning to shoot and planning this operation, and discovering that the space between hatred and love is sometimes just a matter of perspective, I've fallen completely and irrevocably for this man who's shown me that monsters aren't always the ones we're taught to fear. The federal agents we've contacted, the ones who aren't part of Morrison's network, they'll be positioned here and here, Dante is saying, pointing to positions on a map spread across the dining table, and his voice carries the weight of command that makes everyone in the room snap to attention. And when Morrison brings his corrupt team to what he thinks is going to be a raid on our family meeting, he's going to find himself surrounded by legitimate law enforcement, news crews that we've tipped off about a major story, and enough evidence of his crimes to put him away for multiple lifetimes. One of his men asks a question about the trafficking victims we've managed to locate through Morrison's files, the girls and women who are still trapped in the nightmare that Morrison has been profiting from. And Dante's response shows me yet another layer of the man I've married, the part of him that's driven by something more than just revenge or power, but by a genuine desire to protect the innocent even if his methods are anything but pure. "We extract them first," he says, and there's steel in his voice that brooks no argument. "Before we move against Morrison, before we do anything that might spook his organization, we get those women and girls out, and we make sure they're safe, because they've already suffered enough without becoming collateral damage in our war." The meeting breaks up an hour later, and suddenly it's just Dante and me alone in this safe house that feels like the eye of a hurricane, this temporary calm before the storm that will either destroy us or transform us into something new. And when he sits down beside me on the couch and pulls me into his arms with a gentleness that contradicts everything the world thinks it knows about Dante Vittorio, I let myself sink into his warmth and solidity, and the strange comfort of being held by someone who's seen the darkest parts of me and chosen to stand beside me anyway. "Are you afraid?" he asks, and his voice is quiet and intimate. The voice he uses only when we're alone and the masks we wear for the world can finally be set aside. And I consider the question seriously before answering, because he deserves honesty even when the truth is complicated and messy. "I'm terrified," I admit, and I feel his arms tighten around me in response. I'm terrified that something will go wrong, that Morrison will escape, or that innocent people will get hurt, or that we'll win the battle but lose something essential in the process. But I'm also more certain than I've ever been about anything that this is right. That what we're doing matters in a way that transcends our personal vendetta and touches something larger about justice and protection and refusing to let evil flourish just because fighting it requires us to get our hands dirty. Dante is quiet for a long moment, and when he finally speaks, his words carry the weight of confession and vulnerability that I've learned to recognize as his greatest gift to me. This willingness to let me see behind the armor he shows the world. I never expected you, he says, and his lips brush against my temple in a gesture that's achingly tender. I never expected that the woman I married out of political necessity would become the person I trust most in this world, the partner who stands beside me not out of obligation but out of choice. And I never expected to feel this terrified at the thought of losing you, because somewhere in the past 2 weeks, you've become more than just my wife or my ally. You've become the reason I want to survive what's coming. The reason I want to build something better than the empire of blood and violence that I inherited. The next 72 hours pass in a blur of final preparations and stolen moments of intimacy that feel more precious because we both know they might be our last. And when the night of the operation finally arrives, when I'm standing beside Dante in the warehouse where Morrison thinks he's about to conduct the raid of his career, surrounded by his allies who are about to discover they've walked into a carefully constructed trap, I feel a strange sense of calm settle over me like a mantle made of starlight and steel. Morrison's face when he realizes what's happening, when he sees the news cameras and the legitimate federal agents, and the evidence of his crimes displayed on screens all around the warehouse, is a picture of shock and rage and dawning horror that I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. And when I step forward with the gun Dante gave me, when I look into the eyes of the man who murdered my brother and destroyed countless innocent lives, I feel no hesitation as I pull the trigger and watch justice finally be served. 6 months later, I'm standing in the office that used to belong to Salvatore, the space that Dante has renovated and given to me as the headquarters for the legitimate side of our empire, the foundation that helps trafficking victims rebuild their lives, and the task force that works to identify and eliminate the networks that prey on the vulnerable. And my hand rests on the gentle swell of my stomach, where new life is growing, a symbol of hope and possibility in a world that's still dark, but perhaps slightly less so because of the choices we've made. Dante finds me there as the sun sets over the city we've claimed and transformed, and when he wraps his arms around me from behind and rests his hand over mine on my belly, when he whispers words of love and promise against my ear, I'm reminded that redemption isn't about becoming pure or good in any conventional sense, but about choosing every single day to fight for something better than the darkness that threatens to consume us all. "Why are you so dressed up?" he asks, and there's teasing warmth in his voice as he takes in the evening gown I'm wearing for the charity gala we're about to attend. A real one this time, one that will raise money for the very cause that brought us together through blood and violence, and the strange alchemy that transforms hatred into something that looks remarkably like love. I turn in his arms and smile, placing his hand more firmly against the growing evidence of the future we're building together. A future that will be complicated and messy, and probably still touched by violence, but that will also be ours, chosen and fought for, and won through the kind of partnership that can only be forged in fire. "Because, marito mio," I say, using the endearment that once sounded like a threat but now sounds like a promise. "We're going to a charity gala, a real one this time, and I want the world to see what we've become, not the monster and his captive bride that they expected, but the king and queen of an empire that protects instead of destroys, that builds instead of tears down, that chooses light even when we've both spent so much time in darkness." He kisses me then, deep and slow, and full of all the emotion that neither of us is particularly good at expressing in words. And when we finally pull apart, both breathless and smiling, he cups my face in his hands and speaks words that feel like both an ending and a beginning. My beautiful queen of darkness, he whispers, and his storm-gray eyes are soft with an affection that would have seemed impossible just months ago. My partner, my wife, my salvation in a world that tried to destroy us both. And for the first time since my brother died, since I learned that the world is far more complicated and cruel than I ever imagined, since I discovered that sometimes the only way to fight monsters is to become something equally dangerous, I'm finally truly home.